When I think back to that summer, I still can't quite believe how much of my energy was wrapped around someone who disappeared without a trace. It started in late May, right after finals, when everything felt light and open with possibility, when people were making plans for trips, jobs, and carefree nights. That was when I started spending more time with Ryan, a guy from one of my classes who had always hovered at the edge of my social circle but never close enough for me to really know. He was charming in this quiet, unforced way, the type who didn't have to dominate the room because people naturally gravitated toward him. We weren't officially dating, but we were in this in-between stage, talking every day, staying up late on calls, sending each other inside jokes, and it felt like something was building toward more. He wasn't just some summer fling in my head, because he gave me all these little signals that I mattered, from remembering the exact coffee order I once mentioned to actually asking about my goals and plans like he cared about the details. By June, I was sure this was turning into something real. Then one day, out of nowhere, he stopped answering. No warning, no explanation, just silence. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself he was busy or stressed. But days turned into weeks, and his absence became heavier. I'd scroll back through our conversations, rereading the way he'd end messages with, "Talk to you tomorrow," and realize tomorrow never came. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, only to sink when it wasn't him. People told me not to chase, that if he wanted to talk, he would, but the not knowing gnawed at me. Did I do something wrong? Did he meet someone else? It felt like he had just vanished into thin air, taking with him not only our late-night conversations but also the version of me that had started to trust someone again. The worst part was running into mutual friends who would casually mention his name, like, "Oh, I saw Ryan at the beach party last weekend," and I'd have to force a smile while pretending I wasn't crumbling inside because clearly, he hadn't fallen off the face of the earth, he just disappeared from me. Summer stretched on, humid and endless, and every unanswered message became this reminder that I was the one left behind. By August, I forced myself to stop checking my phone so much. I went out with friends, picked up extra shifts at work, even started running again to clear my head, but underneath it all, I carried this ache that never really left. Everyone told me I should move on, that he wasn't worth my energy, but it wasn't that simple. You can't just shut off feelings because someone decides to vanish. I thought maybe I'd never get closure, that I'd just have to accept this chapter as unfinished. But then September came, and with it, the last thing I expected, Ryan walked back into my life, as if the summer of silence had never happened. He showed up at a gathering on campus, looking the same, easy smile, casual confidence, and when his eyes met mine, I felt that same rush of recognition, like nothing had changed. Only everything had changed, because while part of me wanted to run to him and demand answers, another part whispered that there was something about his return that didn't add up. The moment Ryan walked back into that room, I froze, because I didn't know how I was supposed to act, like the girl who spent the whole summer waiting for him or the girl who had already convinced herself she was done. He walked straight toward me, almost like he had been searching for me specifically, and with that same casual tone he used to have, he said, "Hey, I've missed you." The words hit me like a wave, because how could he claim to miss me after 3 months of silence? I didn't trust my voice not to crack, so I just nodded, forcing a polite smile, while inside my chest everything was colliding, anger, relief, confusion, and this unwilling attraction I couldn't smother. He started talking like nothing had happened, asking about my summer, saying he'd been meaning to text but got caught up in things, which sounded so flimsy it almost made me laugh, but I bit my tongue. My friends were around, watching us, and I could feel their curious glances, waiting to see if I would cave, so I kept my responses short, hoping he'd pick up on the fact that I wasn't just going to fall back into step with him. But Ryan was persistent. Over the next few days, he found excuses to cross paths with me on campus, sliding into conversations, asking if I wanted to grab coffee, acting as if the summer never happened. At first, I avoided him, telling myself he didn't deserve another chance. But curiosity is a stubborn thing, and late one night, after another long day of fighting with my own thoughts, I finally agreed to meet him. We sat in this quiet cafe, and he looked at me with those steady eyes that once made me feel like I was the only person in the room, and he said, "I know I owe you an explanation." My heart raced, waiting, needing the truth, but the explanation he gave was vague. He talked about family issues and personal stuff that he didn't want to drag me into, and while part of me wanted to believe him, another part knew something was missing. If it had really been about something serious, why hadn't he said a single word all summer? Why had he ignored every message I sent? When I pressed him, he leaned back, ran a hand through his hair, and said, "It's complicated, but it wasn't about you. I didn't want you to get caught up in it." It sounded rehearsed, like a line he'd practiced. Still, there was a sincerity in his voice that pulled me in, and against my better judgment, I found myself softening. We started talking again, slowly at first, then more often, until it felt almost like May all over again, only this time with a fragile edge. My friends weren't thrilled. One of them, Lena, warned me that people don't just vanish for 3 months unless they want to, and she told me not to fall for excuses. I promised her I was being careful, but deep down, I wasn't sure I believed myself. The more I was around him, the more I noticed little cracks in his story, moments where he seemed distracted, or where he changed the subject if I asked specifics about his summer. There were times when he'd get a call and step outside, only to return looking unsettled but brushing it off like nothing. One night, when I finally worked up the courage to ask him directly if he had been with someone else during those months, he looked at me dead in the eye and said, "No, never." It wasn't like that. His answer was quick, almost too quick, and I couldn't decide if that meant he was telling the truth or hiding it. And yet, as much as I tried to guard myself, there was this pull between us that I couldn't shake. It was like standing near a fire, you could get burned, but the warmth is too tempting to walk away from. Still, something in my gut told me that his reappearance wasn't as simple as he wanted me to believe, and the more I let him back into my life, the more I felt like I was being pulled into something much bigger than just an unfinished summer romance. The deeper I let Ryan back into my life, the more I felt like I was walking on a tightrope without knowing if there was a net below me. Some days he was exactly the person I remembered from spring, thoughtful, attentive, with that way of listening that made me feel like my words actually mattered. But then there were other days where he seemed distant, like his mind was somewhere else entirely, and if I asked about it, he'd quickly change the subject with a practiced smile that felt almost too perfect. My friends started questioning me openly, not just Lena but also my roommate Kara, who one night looked me straight in the eye and said, "Do you even know who he really is? Because I don't think you do." I laughed it off at the time, but her words clung to me because deep down, I wondered the same thing. I kept trying to tell myself that people make mistakes, that maybe he really had gone through something over the summer, but the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. One night, after a late study session, Ryan walked me back to my dorm, and just as we were about to say goodnight, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and instantly slipped it into his pocket without answering. I caught a glimpse though, just enough to see the name Ella flash across before he hid it away. I didn't say anything then, but the name echoed in my head all night. Who was Ella, and why did it feel like he didn't want me to know about her? The next few days, I couldn't stop noticing how secretive he seemed about his phone. He'd always place it face down on the table, silence it if it rang, and once, when I jokingly reached for it to check the time, he snatched it back with a quickness that didn't feel like a joke at all. Still, every time I thought about confronting him, he'd do something small but sweet, like showing up with my favorite snack during a long day or leaving a note on my desk, and I'd convince myself I was overthinking. Until the night everything started to unravel. Kara and I went to a house party one weekend, and of course Ryan was there too, blending in effortlessly as he always did. But midway through the night, when the music was loud and the crowd was thick, I saw him slip outside, phone in hand. Something inside me pushed me to follow, even though part of me hated how desperate it felt. I stepped out quietly, staying back just enough to hear his voice without him seeing me. He was pacing on the sidewalk, speaking in this low, urgent tone, saying things like, "You can't just show up here," and "I told you I'd handle it." My stomach twisted because those weren't words you used with a casual friend, and the way he ran his hand over his face like he was unraveling told me whatever he was hiding wasn't small. He hung up quickly and turned back toward the house, and I ducked behind the porch before he could see me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. That was the moment I realized my friends were right. there was something Ryan wasn't telling me, something bigger than just a bad summer. When I went back inside, I tried to act normal, but every glance I stole at him only made my doubts louder. Later, when he found me in the kitchen and smiled like nothing had happened, I forced myself to smile back, even though I could barely breathe. Because I knew the truth was out there, just beyond my reach, and if I wanted to find it, I'd have to stop waiting for him to hand me answers and start looking for them myself. After that night at the party, I couldn't get the sound of Ryan's voice on that call out of my head. The words, "I told you I'd handle it," played on repeat like a broken record, and the name Ella kept flashing like a warning sign I couldn't ignore. I started noticing patterns I had brushed aside before, like how he never wanted to hang out on weekends without giving vague excuses, or how sometimes he'd cancel plans at the last minute with no real explanation. My friends told me to cut him off before I got hurt again, but a part of me needed to know the truth. It wasn't just about Ryan anymore, it was about not letting someone else dictate my reality, about proving to myself that I wasn't imagining things. So one evening, when he left his jacket on the chair while stepping away to take a call, I felt this surge of recklessness. His phone was in the pocket, and though my hands trembled, I pulled it out, telling myself I'd only look for a second. I didn't even get the chance because the screen lit up on its own, and there it was, another message from Ella, this time reading, "We need to talk, you can't just ignore me forever." My stomach dropped. Before I could process, Ryan came back, and I shoved the phone back into the jacket, trying to steady my breathing. He didn't notice, or at least I thought he didn't, but the image of that message burned into my mind. That night, when I got back to my dorm, I finally broke down and told Kara everything. She wasn't surprised. In fact, she admitted she'd suspected for weeks that Ryan had been hiding another girl. Her words stung, but instead of pity, she offered me a challenge. If you really want answers, stop waiting for him to give them to you. Find them yourself. The next few days I paid closer attention, noting the times he disappeared, the places he avoided, and the excuses he repeated. It all felt like puzzle pieces scattered across the floor, and I was determined to put them together. One afternoon, I followed through on something I wasn't sure I had the courage to do. I trailed him after he left the library, saying he had errands. I kept my distance, heart racing with every step, until he turned into a quiet street a few blocks off campus and walked into a small apartment building I'd never noticed before. I waited outside, nerves twisting my stomach, until I saw him emerge 30 minutes later, this time not alone. A girl walked beside him, her hair pulled into a loose braid, her expression serious, and even though I was too far to hear, I could see the tension in their body language. She was talking fast, gesturing with her hands, while he kept glancing around like he was worried someone would see them. When they parted ways, he didn't notice me standing half-hidden behind a row of parked cars, but my heart was in my throat because I knew instantly that this had to be Ella. Seeing her made everything real. She wasn't just a name on his phone or a shadow in my imagination, she was flesh and blood, and from the look on her face, she wasn't someone he could easily erase. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, but mixed with it was a strange sense of relief, because at least I wasn't crazy. There was something there, something he had tried to keep from me, and now I had proof. Still, I didn't confront him right away. I wanted him to tell me himself, to see if he would ever choose honesty over lies. The next time we met for coffee, I studied him with new eyes, catching the little slips in his words, the way he avoided details about his summer, and the practiced calm in his smile. And though he tried to act like everything between us was normal, all I could think about was the girl with the braid, the one he had sworn didn't exist. The more I sat across from him, the more I realized the truth I was chasing might not just break my heart, it might change the way I saw him forever. The longer I kept quiet about what I had seen, the heavier it felt pressing against me like a secret too sharp to carry. Every time Ryan smiled at me or reached for my hand, I couldn't stop seeing Ella's face outside that apartment, couldn't stop hearing the urgency in his voice during that phone call. I kept asking myself why he was hiding her from me. Was she an ex he hadn't let go of, someone he had cheated with, or something else entirely? The uncertainty became unbearable. I decided the only way to get answers was to confront him, but when the moment finally came, the truth didn't spill out as neatly as I imagined. One Friday evening, we were sitting in his car after grabbing dinner, the windows fogged slightly from the cool air outside, and I turned to him and asked as calmly as I could, "Who is Ella?" For a moment, he froze, his eyes darting away like he hadn't expected me to know that name, and then he exhaled slowly, pressing his palms against the steering wheel. "You weren't supposed to find out," he said quietly, which only made my stomach knot tighter. When he finally spoke again, the explanation that came wasn't what I had expected at all. He told me Ella was his sister. Not a girlfriend, not someone he had dated, but his younger sister, who had moved to the city over the summer under messy circumstances he didn't want to talk about. He said she had gotten into trouble, financial, personal, he didn't specify, and he had been spending the summer helping her get on her feet. According to him, she didn't want anyone knowing her situation, and he had kept it all secret to protect her privacy. It should have made me feel better, but instead it only made me feel dizzy. Why hadn't he just told me that months ago instead of vanishing without a word? Why did he act so guilty when her name came up, like he was hiding an affair? And why did she look at him that day with such intensity, like they were arguing about something far more serious than a sibling's bad summer? I wanted to believe him, I really did, but the holes in his story were too wide to ignore. "If she's really your sister, why couldn't you just tell me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted, and said, "Because it's not simple. There are things about her life that you don't understand, and I didn't want to drag you into it. I thought disappearing would be easier than lying to you." The irony of that nearly made me laugh, because disappearing had been the biggest lie of all. I sat there in silence, torn between relief that he hadn't been cheating and suspicion that something still wasn't right. He reached for my hand, his grip warm and steady, and said, "Please, just trust me on this. I'll tell you everything when the time is right." His words were meant to comfort me, but they left me with more questions than answers. That night, when I got back to my room, Kara was waiting, and the second she saw my face, she knew. I told her everything, his story about Ella being his sister, his vague promises, his plea for trust. Kara didn't buy it. "If she's really his sister, why hasn't he introduced you? Why hasn't anyone else ever mentioned her? And why does he look guilty every time her name comes up?" Her questions sank into me like stones, because I had no good answers. The truth was, I didn't know if Ryan was protecting Ella, lying about her, or both. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't sit around waiting for his right time. If I wanted to know what was really going on, I'd have to go straight to the source, Ella herself. Once I made the decision to go to Ella directly, it felt like crossing an invisible line. I knew Ryan would see it as a betrayal, but the weight of not knowing was heavier than the risk of losing him. So I went back to that quiet apartment building I'd seen him enter with her, my pulse racing the whole way. I didn't even know what I'd say if she answered the door, but when I finally knocked, my hand trembling, it wasn't Ryan who opened, it was Ella. Up close, she looked younger than I expected, maybe only a year or two younger than me, her eyes sharp but tired, like she had been carrying too much for too long. For a moment she just stared at me, as if she knew exactly who I was before I even introduced myself. "You're with Ryan," she said flatly, not as a question but a statement. I nodded, and she let out a dry laugh before stepping aside to let me in. The apartment was small, sparsely furnished, with stacks of unopened mail on the table and a faint smell of coffee and cigarette smoke lingering in the air. I sat down nervously while she leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying me like she was deciding whether I deserved the truth. When I asked why Ryan had hidden her, she shook her head. "He didn't hide me. He hid what I know." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" I asked. She hesitated, then finally said, "Ryan didn't spend the summer helping me. He spent the summer trying to cover up something he did." The air in the room felt heavier instantly, like the walls were closing in. I pressed her for details, my voice barely steady, and what she told me unraveled everything I thought I knew. She explained that Ryan had gotten involved in something shady during the summer. Borrowing money from the wrong people, promising things he couldn't deliver, and dragging her into it by using her name for parts of it without telling her. When it all went bad, people started coming after her, thinking she was responsible, which was why she moved here, trying to stay out of sight. Ryan had been the one meeting with them, trying to handle it, which explained the urgent calls, the secrecy, the guilty look every time his phone buzzed. He didn't ghost you because of me, Ella said bitterly. He ghosted you because he couldn't keep his lies straight. You were just another thing he thought he could control. Hearing her say that made my chest ache in a way I can't explain, because part of me still wanted to believe he was the guy who cared about me in the spring, not the one who used me as a distraction from the mess he created. When I left her apartment, I felt numb, like the ground beneath me had shifted and I didn't know where to step next. I didn't even know if I should confront him again, but fate decided for me, because Ryan was waiting outside my dorm later that night. He looked relieved when he saw me, but the relief faded quickly when he noticed the expression on my face. You talked to her, he said, and for the first time, his confident mask cracked. She told you everything. I wanted to scream, to demand why he thought I wouldn't find out, but instead I just asked, was any of it real? Or was I just part of the cover too? He reached for me, desperation flickering in his eyes, but I stepped back before he could touch me. I didn't mean for it to hurt you, he said, his voice raw. I swear, the way I feel about you is real. I didn't know how to keep you and keep the rest of it from falling apart. The worst part was, I believed he meant it, but I also knew it didn't matter. Because love built on half-truths and secrecy isn't love, it's survival. And I refused to be part of someone else's survival plan. I told him goodbye that night, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking, and for once he didn't try to stop me. As I walked away, I didn't feel victorious, just hollow, but beneath that hollowness was a spark of something stronger, clarity. Ryan might have come back in September like nothing had happened, but I wasn't the same girl who had waited all summer. I was the girl who finally realized that being left in the dark once was enough, and I wasn't going to let it happen again.